Well, hello, and welcome to this first sort of teaching lesson on the bowl of the pelvis. So, I think this is something that we should all have access to in terms of having a bit of a mental map or just an awareness that this part of our body exists and that we can actually interact with it and facilitate little changes within, whether we're having bowel issues like constipation or diarrhea or fecal or gas incontinence or bladder issues like urgency, like you feel like you have to pee all the time, or leakage, even if it's just like every once in a while I sneeze and a little bit of urine comes out, or just pain and tension and feeling like the bowl of your pelvis is just a kind of like stuck, stodgy, boggy part of your body. So here we go. We're going to dive in. Now, this is not going to be a fully complete lesson, but I wanted to give you the highlights. So if you want to learn more, if you have questions, you can hop on a private call and we can discuss this area as it pertains to you. So this is like Grand Central Station, by the way. So there's no part of your body that the tissues in the bowl of the pelvis does not influence, and vice versa. So we have this kind of bidirectional, I call it energy, this bidirectional energy flow from this area all the way up to the crown of your head, all the way down to the bottoms of your feet. Okay, so it's very powerful, very potent, very sacred, and very important. So if we start on the back side, you can see that this is where our low back is. So here's the L4, L5, and then here's this large triangular bone called the sacrum, which is the Latin word for sacrum it literally stands for sacred. So that's got to mean something. And then here's the tailbone. So that little tailbone that sits in this beautiful sea of muscles down at the base of your spine. Now, you can also see we have these amazing ligaments, which are the strong, sturdy ligaments that keep us together and upright. And then, of course, what you can't see are all of the glute and the hip muscles, as well as all of the spinal muscles that course all the way from tailbone all the way up to your head and neck. And so, really, the important piece about this is that if you see this little bowl back here, there's this muscle group that looks like a bowl, right? And a lot of times when I work with people, whether it's in my Pilates class that I teach, or one-on-one, whether it's virtual or in person, I always love to kind of get this or give this mental imagery of this area of our body, because you can see that there's this kind of like this expansiveness to it, like it's kind of coming out and to you. It's three-dimensional. So a lot of times I like to cue people to really breathe into the space between their sit bones and their tailbone. And you can see how much tissue will then receive that oxygen and blood flow and circulation. It's just such an underserved part of our body. So it's really nice to have some awareness of, and again, kind of that little mental map, so that you can even send breath there at a stoplight. Or if you're waiting at the post office, you can breathe into this backside area. Now, if we turn her around, you can see that here's the pubic bone, and then there's the fruit. So I always kind of reference this as a pelvic bowl, with the fruit being the pelvic organs. So behind the pubic bone lives the bladder. And then if a female still has her uterus, behind the bladder lives the uterus and the ovaries. And then, of course, the rectum. And these pelvic organs sit like little fruit in the bowl, and they're supported by your pelvic muscles. Now, it's really important to highlight the fact that, back to what I said earlier, that there's no part of the body that doesn't have some effect within these tissues, and vice versa. These tissues, the bladder, the uterus, and the rectum, are very intimately and often subconsciously connected to your brain and your nervous system. So they really respond, or sometimes react very acutely to stress, right? Which is a really big statement that can look different for all people. But these tissues oftentimes will signal issues after major transitions, like loss of a job, quitting of a job, especially if it was a toxic job. You more than likely experienced issues in, say constipation, issues in the bowels, or maybe bladder urgency, like you have to pee all the time, or you started experiencing leakage, or maybe increased period pain or belly bloat. So a lot of times these tissues are really signaling to us as humans, like, hey, something's out of balance. Something's not right. And oftentimes we know what it is. It's just we don't always know what to do about it. So again, these tissues are very inherently connected to our body's stress system. And that's why a lot of the work done in this area is not just about exercise and hands-on work. It's about really helping to kind of deepen your relationship with how your nervous system works and how your nervous system and brain respond to different things, different stimuli in the atmosphere, in your home, different people, and so forth, which is an amazing journey, by the way, and it looks different for all people. So just a little side note to let you know that while these are kind of physical organs, they have this very like energetic and this very kind of emotional component to them. There's a huge component, okay, in a huge energetic and emotional component that lives in the pelvis. So a little side note. So if we take these organs out and we think about the pelvic floor muscles, which is what most people think about if they've had awareness or exposure to the pelvic area. So for our purposes, I want you to think about the pelvic floor muscles as having kind of two layers that we tend to mostly care about, mostly speak to and work with. Layer number one is probably a familiar layer for many. So this is the first layer, and this is what we might reference as the sphincter layer. It's the hug layer. It's either going to start or stop the flow of gas, urine, or feces. Now, if you're 40 plus, say, you probably have heard of Kegels. Oh boy, big conversation. But the short story is that it isn't Kegels that we need to be doing. But I want to share a little bit about kind of what it is we would consider instead, because these tissues don't need to be just strong. They need to be kind of pliable and relaxed, and they need to have this kind of like soft home base that they hang out in, so that when we need to hold back gas, urine, or feces, in the event of, we have a full bladder, we're like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom, I waited too long. We need these tissues to have kind of the proper tone to be able to sort of resist anything from leaking or coming out when we don't want it to. But just in a regular day-to-day living, these tissues need to be kind of relaxed and just kind of, again, I use the word pliable because they need to have this kind of elasticity and extensibility and this kind of relaxed capacity, but the capacity to engage and let go. And so you can kind of see the energy of what I'm trying to create here in terms of the pelvic bowl. Now, these tissues, they do kind of hug, or as people used to say, squeeze. They are kind of the squeeze tissues, only we don't want to squeeze so hard that it causes a lot of, tightness, where if these tissues are always squeezing, they get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And back to what I said earlier about these tissues being really inherently, I spoke to the organs, but these pelvic muscles are really also inherently connected to your body's brain and nervous system and the stress response, where these tissues in the bowl of the pelvis, the pelvic floor muscles, will subconsciously clench, especially if we're going through, oh my gosh, any number of stressful events, traumatic events. Even if these are past lived experiences, these tissues remember, even when our brain may not always remember or want to remember. So it's really important to kind of uncover the sort of like the tone of your own tissues, whether they run a little bit tighter or whether you feel like they're just out to lunch and just kind of like you feel disconnected from them. There's a way to kind of get these tissues back online and finding that kind of tissue extensibility and pliability again. So that's, again, why we don't want to just be doing Kegels, but why there's a few other things that we can be doing instead to really help stabilize this first layer and be able to allow it to have its lengthening response and its, again, kind of extensibility. Now, underneath this, I love this layer. This is what's typically referenced as the jellyfish layer. So you can see, we actually looked at it from this vantage point already. But you can see that this layer goes all the way back. It hugs the bottom of the sacrum and then surrounds that tailbone and then courses forward through the bowl of the pelvis. And here's where it has this really intimate connection, fascial, nerve, muscular, and energetic connection, emotional connection too with the bladder. So this little jellyfish muscle group If you imagine an upside down, or imagine a jellyfish, it expands and it contracts. It's not in any rush. Again, very pliable. This muscle group, deep in the bowl of the pelvis, when we inhale, it extends and kind of elongates and drops. When we exhale, it gently contracts to rebound air back out. Filling the belly, filling the bowl of the pelvis. Exhale. Inhaling all the way down, down, down to the bowl of the pelvis. Exhaling. So what we're doing is we're basically kind of opening up the channels. I always think of like the three diaphragms, our glottis, our abdominal diaphragm, and all the way down, down, down into the bowl of the pelvis, the pelvic diaphragm, to really receive that air and oxygenation. And again, back to the bladder, if it's been really kind of urgent and, leaky and just kind of, you're like, I don't trust my bladder. When we start to incorporate this deep pelvic breath, not that every breath has to be really deep and pelvic centric, but there's a way to kind of facilitate those tissues to more naturally draw that deeper breath in and that deeper oxygenation, this bladder goes for a much smoother ride. And therefore it can function. It has space to fill. It has more confidence to fill. Usually there's less pain and kind of rigidity in the bowl of the pelvis. The rectum can actually release bowel movements more easily because it doesn't have these muscles that are kind of tightly, lassoed around it. So a lot goes on in the bowl of the pelvis. I could go on and on, but I wanted to kind of highlight the fact that there's a lot that is connected and interconnected in terms of these tissues, whether we're talking about the muscles, the organs, and even like the nervous system, the lymphatic system. This area is like a sump pump for the lymphatic vessels and there's a lot of them in this little area, as well as several other areas in the body. There's a lot of inherent connection to the digestive system as well. So a lot of really cool connections. So on that note, I hope this has been helpful to at least kind of get your little wheels turning in terms of, connecting in with your body. What are you sensing? What are you feeling? What are you being challenged by? And who do you need maybe to potentially ask for support, which can look like a myriad of different types of practitioners and professionals. So I hope this has been helpful. Again, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next video.